The first hour after waking is quietly more powerful than most people realize. The mind is still fluid, still open to direction, yet so often it is handed over to distraction, to habit, to the endless noise that doesn't serve us. These early moments are fleeting, yet they hold the potential to shape focus, clarity, and emotional steadiness for the entire day. The Stoics taught that mastery of the mind is the foundation of a good life, and in these first minutes, that mastery is within reach. Every small choice made now ripples outward, influencing the way we think, feel, and act long before the world imposes its demands. Even a simple act, rising with intention, breathing deeply, noticing the light as it shifts across the room, carries more significance than we often give it credit for. The body begins to awaken, neurons fire, and subtle rhythms of attention and energy begin to synchronize. By claiming these moments deliberately, rather than surrendering them to autopilot, we establish a foundation of presence and control. The morning becomes a quiet practice of sovereignty, a rehearsal for the rest of the day, and a reminder that even small actions can cultivate clarity, focus, and purpose. When the alarm rings, the body is still suspended between sleep and wakefulness. The mind lingers in a space of potential, where thought is fluid and perception is expansive. Yet most of us press snooze, chasing a few more minutes of comfort. Each fragmented cycle only clouds the mind further, leaving us slower, groggier, and more reactive. Imagine instead that your first action is deliberate, purposeful. A voice from the future calls you forward. Not hype, not motivation, but clarity. It interrupts the autopilot of the mind, forcing conscious thought before the unconscious dictates the rhythm of your day. By meeting the day with intention, you reclaim a piece of yourself that is otherwise surrendered to habit. Standing upright, feeling the body shift from the softness of the bed to the firmness of the floor, the senses begin to register the subtle signals of the waking world. The eyes drink in light, the spine stretches, the lungs expand, and each breath carries awareness into the body. This is a dialogue between mind and body, ancient and natural. Light hitting the retina signals the brain to release cortisol, not as stress, but as readiness, a pulse of alertness calibrated to the day. Even 1 minute outside begins to align circadian rhythm and conscious choice. When body and mind synchronize, the next movement, thought, or decision flows with momentum that is impossible while lying inert. Movement itself, even in its simplest form, reshapes the day. Blood courses more freely, neurons fire, and neurotransmitters elevate focus and mood. The prefrontal cortex stirs from its sluggish morning state, reasoning aligns with perception, and the mind becomes present. Each push-up, stretch, or mindful step is a rehearsal in mastery, a small but meaningful assertion of agency. Breath and motion combine to orient the mind toward reason, calming fear responses, and preparing the body for deliberate action. Even brief movement establishes a rhythm that echoes throughout the day, reinforcing clarity, focus, and the ability to act intentionally. Cold water, brief and deliberate, introduces controlled discomfort. For 90 seconds, the body is shocked and the mind engages fully, attentive and calm. Adrenaline and norepinephrine rise, awakening awareness and sharpening attention. The nervous system practices resilience. Discomfort becomes a teacher, not a threat. Each exposure expands the mind's capacity for calm and clarity, reinforcing the principle that choice, not avoidance, defines the beginning of the day. The smallest challenge faced deliberately becomes practice in composure, training the mind to remain steady in the face of uncertainty. Writing by hand, even for 5 to 10 minutes, structures chaos. Thoughts, worries, and intentions are externalized onto the page, giving the mind space to breathe. Gratitude sharpens perception, priorities clarify, and emotional turbulence quiets. By committing pen to paper, you exercise prohairesis, the Stoic ability to choose your response before circumstances impose themselves. Handwriting engages neural pathways that support intention, patience, and self-command. Each line written, each thought organized, becomes a subtle reinforcement of control over attention, emotion, and action. For the first hour, external input must wait. Notifications, messages, social media, they are distractions that fracture attention and erode agency. By delaying these intrusions, you preserve the integrity of your mental landscape. Focus, like a muscle, strengthens with resistance. Each moment of restraint reinforces the mind's sovereignty. Even caffeine, if delayed, amplifies energy rather than disrupting it. The early period of calm and clarity sets a rhythm for the day, creating a mental baseline that supports deliberate, unreactive engagement with whatever comes next. Reflection and visualization extend this framework. The mind rehearses the day ahead, anticipating challenges and mapping responses. This is not fantasy but intentional preparation. Mentally rehearsing obstacles and responses trains the mind to act with composure, reduces reactive impulses, and sharpens focus. The morning becomes a space in which clarity and agency are established before the world demands them. By practicing this, you cultivate resilience, foresight, and the ability to navigate the day with reasoned action. Finally, integration of all these elements, awakening, light, movement, controlled discomfort, structured reflection, protected focus, and visualization, produces a compounded effect. The morning ceases to be a series of tasks and becomes a ritual of self-sovereignty. Small habits reinforce one another, producing a mind that is attentive, resilient, and directed. The window is brief, yet its impact is profound. The choice is always yours, to surrender it to distraction, or to reclaim it and set the day, and perhaps life itself, into a course of clarity and purpose. If these principles resonate, consider subscribing. By committing to this journey, you take a small but meaningful step toward mastery over your mind, your focus, and the way you choose to inhabit each day. In these moments, the mind is primed for reflection. One can consider the day ahead without anxiety, plan without overwhelm, and face the inevitable unpredictability with composure. The threshold is a laboratory where thought, emotion, and habit are observed and adjusted. By exercising discipline here, one trains the mind to resist the pull of chaos and to navigate the day with reasoned judgment. The power is subtle, almost imperceptible at first, yet cumulative. Just as a sculptor chisels away small fragments to reveal form, so too does deliberate engagement at the start of the day shape the mind over time. The human tendency is to surrender to what is easiest, to follow the path of least resistance, yet this is the very mechanism that allows life to drift unexamined. Fragmented sleep, autopilot behaviors, reactive thought, they are all subtle forms of surrender. The Stoics remind us that the mind is the citadel of freedom, and every conscious action, however small, reinforces that inner stronghold. Marcus Aurelius wrote that, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." In the context of morning, this power is tangible, immediate, and profoundly transformative. The first step out of bed is the first affirmation that the mind governs itself rather than the other way around. Even the body participates in this emerging clarity. Blood pressure stabilizes, oxygen fills the lungs, the senses awaken to the dim light of morning. The subtle interplay of sensation and cognition reinforces the sense of presence. Action and awareness converge as the mind moves from dream to thought, from inertia to intention. Fragmentation yields to flow. The small decision to rise without hesitation is amplified by subsequent actions. A controlled breath, a stretch, the simple observation of surroundings. These minor deliberate acts compound into a rhythm of agency, a scaffold upon which the rest of the day is constructed. By reclaiming the first moments, one exercises sovereignty over both thought and action. The day becomes not a series of reactions to external stimuli, but a coherent trajectory guided by awareness. Habit, which often dictates unconscious behavior, is interrupted and consciousness asserts itself. These early choices establish momentum, shaping decisions, emotions, and interactions long after the alarm is silenced. The subtle discipline of deliberate awakening cultivates resilience, focus, and freedom, offering a reminder that the mind is a terrain that can be mastered if approached with care and consistency. This threshold between sleep and wakefulness is fleeting, yet its impact is enduring. It is here, in the quiet liminal space, that the mind can be trained, habits can be initiated, and the day can be aligned with purpose. Fragmentation and distraction are temptations, but deliberate action, grounded in reason and guided by awareness, produces clarity and presence. The morning is not merely a start to the day, it is a rehearsal for life itself. Every decision, every movement, every breath taken with intention in these moments shapes the quality of experience, fortifies the mind, and cultivates the enduring Stoic practice of self-governance. Standing upright, feeling the body shift from the softness of the bed to the firmness of the floor, the mind begins to register the subtle signals of the waking world. The eyes, sensitive and attuned, register the gentle light spilling across the room, a signal older than any clock or schedule, older than the routines we cling to. The body responds instinctively, muscles awaken, the spine stretches, the lungs expand, and even the simplest breath carries the rhythm of life into every cell. This is not mere physiology, it is a dialogue between consciousness and the physical vessel, a conversation that has evolved over millennia. Every photon striking the retina sends a cascade of information, signaling to the suprachiasmatic nucleus that it is time to activate alertness, to prepare for engagement, to synchronize the body's energy with the cycle of the sun. This alignment between environment and physiology is something modern life often obscures, yet it is profoundly natural, profoundly necessary. Even the briefest exposure carries weight. 1 minute outside, the eyes drinking in the early light, begins to adjust the circadian rhythm, nudging the production of hormones that regulate alertness, mood, and energy. The morning cortisol awakening response rises gently, not as a spike of stress, but as a calibrated pulse that primes the body to move, to think, to act. Each heartbeat resonates with intention, each breath amplifies awareness, and each step taken in sunlight roots the mind in the present rather than in yesterday's worries or tomorrow's anxieties. This is subtle, yet the accumulation of such moments creates a baseline for the day's clarity. When body and mind are synchronized in this way, decisions are swifter, attention is sharper, and reactions are tempered by calm observation rather than impulsive drive. The mere act of stepping into light transforms the mind from reactive to responsive, from fragmented to coherent. The nervous system, intricate and precise, interprets these signals with a fidelity that often goes unnoticed. Specialized retinal cells, designed to detect ambient light, communicate directly with areas of the brain that govern sleep, alertness, and hormone regulation. The system does not distinguish between trivial and vital. It treats the first cues of light as essential commands. By honoring these signals, even briefly, the mind and body initiate a dialogue of readiness rather than resistance. Cortisol peaks in harmony with the rising sun. Dopamine begins its subtle orchestration of motivation and attention, and serotonin prepares the emotional equilibrium necessary for balance. This biochemical rhythm, ancient and unalterable, is the foundation of our capacity to act with clarity. Interrupt it or ignore it, and the day begins with friction. Embrace it, and the day is carried forward with the momentum of natural alignment. Light is also a teacher, an unspoken guide toward consistency and awareness. Standing in its presence demonstrates to the mind that time is not arbitrary, that life has a cadence, and that awareness itself can be anchored in simple acts. The physical gesture of stepping outside, eyes open to the morning, is not merely symbolic. It instructs neural pathways, shaping both perception and cognition. Each exposure calibrates the circadian clock, signaling not only wakefulness, but readiness for thought, movement, and emotional regulation. It is here, in these minutes of deliberate attention to light and posture, that the day gains structure before the mind has even begun to chase distractions. This structure is not imposed by willpower alone. It is an interplay of biology and consciousness, a partnership that rewards intentional alignment. Even brief sunlight exposure initiates a cascade that extends beyond the morning. Neural circuits adapt to predict and anticipate the rhythm of light, creating a scaffolding for mental endurance and focus. Emotion, often dictated by chance or circumstance, gains a steady undercurrent, influenced by the subtle chemistry of alertness, serotonin, and circadian alignment. The effect is cumulative. Days built upon consistent mornings develop a resilience that is invisible to the casual observer, but palpable to the mind navigating complexity. The act of stepping into light is a microcosm of Stoic principle, the recognition that while external events cannot be controlled, the mind can be guided, disciplined, and aligned with the natural order. By attending to the body, to light, and to conscious action, one exercises sovereignty over the mind before the world imposes its agenda. This practice also bridges the gap between perception and action. The first moments of daylight, received deliberately, act as a primer for all subsequent effort. Focused attention during these minutes cultivates the ability to direct energy rather than react to circumstance. It is a quiet training of will, an exercise in self-governance that requires no dramatic gestures, only repeated engagement with awareness and intention. Every neuron, every breath, every heartbeat participates in this orchestration. And as the body responds to light, the mind internalizes the rhythm, gradually shifting from sluggish wakefulness to alert readiness. The discipline of presence is reinforced not by moralizing or external pressure, but by alignment with natural cues. Even the simplest realization that standing upright in sunlight affects the mind as much as any meditation or ritual carries immense power. The body's responsiveness to the environment becomes a tool for mastery rather than a constraint to be managed. By observing the way light, posture, and motion interact, one begins to understand the subtle mechanics of consciousness. The mind, no longer passive, participates actively in the formation of the day. Small acts, repeated with consistency, compound into a structure of attention, purpose, and calm. The philosophy of Stoicism, which prizes reason over impulse, finds practical expression in these daily choices. External events are not the determinants of clarity or strength, but deliberate action aligned with natural order is. The Stoic anchor of this practice becomes evident in its simplicity. The body and mind, when guided by intention, follow nature rather than resist it. The sunlight, the posture, the breath, all cooperate with conscious action to shape the day. External events remain indifferent, but internal governance is cultivated. As Epictetus observed, no man is free who is not master of himself. In the quiet power of morning light, mastery begins not with grand gestures but with the simple, deliberate act of standing, seeing, and aligning with the natural order. Awareness is claimed, readiness established, and the day unfolds from a position of conscious sovereignty. Movement itself, even in its briefest and simplest forms, carries an impact that resonates far beyond the immediate physical sensation. A few minutes of deliberate motion sets the body and mind into a rhythm that communicates readiness, presence, and intentionality. Blood rushes through the veins with a subtle insistence, awakening cells, neurons, and senses that had lingered in the quiet of sleep. The prefrontal cortex, sluggish from hours of rest, begins to stir, bridging thought with action, planning with execution. Neurotransmitters rise in synchrony. Serotonin lifts the emotional baseline, dopamine signals anticipation and reward, and endorphins settle the body into the comforting cadence of engagement. The mind, once foggy, finds focus in the simple articulation of the body's movement. Even seemingly trivial actions, stretching, bending, walking, or performing a short series of exercises, are profound in their effect, signaling that the day is not something to be endured, but something to be shaped by conscious choice. Even the breath, when paired with motion, amplifies this effect. Inhalations bring oxygen to the tissues, but more importantly, they anchor awareness to the present. Each exhale releases tension that may have accumulated overnight, traces of stress or unresolved worry, while simultaneously signaling to the nervous system that the body is active and alive. When movement is combined with mindful breathing, the result is a subtle but powerful state of embodied clarity. The body becomes a vehicle for consciousness, and the act of doing, even a few push-ups, squats, or stretches, shapes the very quality of thought. The Stoics understood that control over the body informs control over the mind, and that virtue is expressed not only in moral reasoning, but also in disciplined action. The impact of early movement extends into emotional regulation as well. Physical activity engages the body's reward systems, producing chemicals that naturally stabilize mood. Even in short durations, motion signals to the mind that effort has been expended, prompting a subtle sense of accomplishment before external tasks have begun. This internal reinforcement reduces susceptibility to distraction or negative affect, creating a baseline of calm confidence. The alignment of thought, motion, and chemical signals forms an integrated system where physical action supports cognitive clarity. The seemingly simple act of moving, when practiced with awareness, establishes a template for approaching challenges with composure and precision. There is also a neuroplastic dimension to this practice. Movement stimulates the production of brain-derived neurotrophic factor, BDNF, which nurtures neural growth and strengthens existing connections. The brain becomes more adaptable, capable of processing information with increased flexibility, and the prefrontal cortex, essential for executive functions, is primed for planning, decision-making, and emotional regulation. These physiological processes are not abstract. They have immediate implications for the day ahead. The capacity to focus, to respond rather than react, to maintain equanimity amid minor disruptions is enhanced. Small, consistent movements each morning, therefore, are acts of mental cultivation, subtly reshaping the architecture of cognition itself. Movement is also a microcosm of choice and discipline, a quiet exercise in the Stoic principle that virtue is expressed through intentional action. Each decision to engage, to resist comfort, to inhabit the body fully, cultivates resilience and mastery over internal impulses. The smallest repetitions, raising a hand, stretching a limb, walking a few steps, are rehearsal for larger acts of agency throughout the day. The mind learns that exertion, guided by attention, yields clarity. The body becomes a tool of reasoning rather than a vessel of habit. In this interplay between physical motion and conscious awareness, one discovers that even minimal, deliberate movement can set a trajectory for mental composure, emotional balance, and purposeful action. Cold water, sudden and purposeful, is not simply a physical sensation. It is a practice in presence, a subtle exercise in self-mastery that engages both body and mind. The initial shock is undeniable. The skin prickles, the breath catches, and for a brief moment, the mind hovers between instinct and reason. Yet within this fleeting discomfort lies profound opportunity. Adrenaline pulses through the system, norepinephrine rises, and neurons fire in a symphony of alertness that signals the brain attention is required, engagement is necessary. The body is fully alive, the mind fully attentive, and the small act of immersion becomes a rehearsal for discipline. The resistance we feel is not resistance at all. It is guidance. a teacher that shows where strength and composure reside when external conditions are unyielding. The nervous system responds with remarkable adaptability. Repeated exposure trains it to tolerate stress, to calibrate its reaction to challenge, and to integrate discomfort as a neutral event rather than a threat. This brief cold encounter teaches the mind that the initial shock is temporary, that calm can follow even in extreme circumstances. The sympathetic nervous system activates in measured bursts, priming the body for immediate alertness, while the parasympathetic system, engaged subtly through controlled breathing, tempers the reaction, creating a balance that extends beyond the shower. It is a microcosm of life. Moments of sudden challenge are not meant to be avoided, but met with composed attention. Through this small ritual, resilience is cultivated in real time, and the mind learns that clarity and calm are attainable even in situations designed to provoke instinctive reaction. There is also a dimension of habit in this practice that is both subtle and transformative. While the body quickly adapts to repeated cold exposure, the mind develops a template for facing other challenges. Discomfort in the shower becomes a metaphor for the discomfort encountered in daily life. Unexpected demands, emotional turbulence, social friction, or unforeseen obstacles. The skill cultivated in this brief ritual, the ability to remain present, observe sensation without reactive judgment, and act deliberately, carries over. Repeatedly choosing to encounter small, controlled discomfort creates a pattern of confidence and resilience, a quiet proof that fear or resistance does not dictate action. In this, the morning cold becomes more than a physical act. It becomes a philosophical practice, a Stoic rehearsal in equanimity. Even the smallest variations amplify the effect, closing the eyes to focus on breath, adjusting posture to stabilize the body, counting the seconds deliberately. These minor attentional acts engage the mind fully. Consciousness becomes layered with intention, and the initial shock no longer dominates experience. The body becomes a vehicle for training attention, the mind a laboratory for cultivating endurance and calm. Discomfort, when approached with awareness, transforms into a teacher rather than an adversary. The boundaries of tolerance expand with each repetition, and the space in which the mind can operate without reactivity grows. Small choices in moments of intensity have disproportionate influence, teaching that freedom is found not in avoidance, but in the mastery of self amid challenge. The rhythm established by this ritual influences the unfolding of the day. Each task, encounter, or decision that follows is subtly affected by the mental tone set in these 90 seconds. The mind is no longer a passive observer of circumstance, but an active participant, capable of responding with clarity, deliberation, and calm energy. The nervous system, trained to meet stress with measured attention, provides a baseline that allows focus, reasoning, and emotional regulation to operate more effectively. Even mundane or repetitive challenges are approached with steadiness rather than agitation, and the composure practiced in the cold encounter translates into resilience across all spheres of daily engagement. The philosophical significance of this practice is profound. The Stoics emphasized that mastery of the self is paramount, that virtue is expressed in the ability to act with reason rather than be governed by impulse or external circumstance. By choosing to confront discomfort each morning, even in such a small and controlled form, one cultivates the internal faculties necessary to navigate life with equanimity. The shock of cold water becomes an instrument of self-governance, a reminder that freedom is exercised in deliberate choice, not in the absence of challenge. The act of standing under the cold, observing sensation, regulating breath, and sustaining attention is an enactment of this principle, a rehearsal of the inner freedom the Stoics held as central to a good life. Even in moments when the body protests and the mind urges retreat, the practice endures. With each repetition, the neural and psychological pathways are reinforced. Resistance yields to presence, discomfort to awareness, reaction to choice. It is a disciplined engagement that shapes the trajectory of the morning and sets a foundation for intentionality that persists. By the time the body has adjusted and the mind has acclimated, the individual emerges with a sense of mastery, calm, and readiness. The brief shock that began as challenge becomes a source of strength, a small but potent affirmation that the day, and life itself, is approached from a position of deliberate action. Controlled discomfort in the morning, embodied in cold water exposure, is therefore more than a physical practice. It is a training ground for mental resilience, a rehearsal in stoic composure, and a subtle alignment of body, mind, and environment. The shock is temporary, yet the skill acquired is enduring. Freedom, as Epictetus and the Stoics observed, is realized in the choices we make amid constraint and challenge. By deliberately choosing to engage with discomfort, even for 90 seconds, one cultivates an inner authority that persists through the day. The morning is thus claimed, not by avoidance or convenience, but by conscious action, establishing a rhythm of attention, calm, and mastery that extends far beyond the shower itself. Even brief writing sessions can be transformative. Journaling for 5 to 10 minutes provides enough time to externalize lingering thoughts without creating resistance or fatigue. The mind, freed from the burden of carrying every detail internally, experiences a subtle expansion of focus. Cognitive bandwidth increases, allowing attention to be applied to decisions, planning, and creative problem-solving without the constant interference of unexamined worry. This practice creates a scaffold for the day. Priorities are no longer vague intentions, but tangible markers that guide action. By creating structure in thought, the mind is primed for clarity, the body is supported by reduced tension, and the emotional landscape is subtly regulated before the day imposes external pressures. There is also a psychological elegance in the method of journaling that extends beyond simple organization. The act of translating internal experience into language engages the prefrontal cortex, enhancing executive function while simultaneously dampening hyperactive emotional responses. By observing one's own thoughts as they appear on the page, the mind cultivates a form of meta-awareness. Emotional disturbances are seen as data rather than directives, priorities are evaluated without bias, and intentions are refined in real time. Through consistent practice, the hand becomes an instrument of attention, the mind a participant in its own regulation, and the early morning ritual, a space where clarity is chosen before the world can impose distraction. Gratitude, when included in this structured reflection, reshapes perception in subtle but profound ways. By recording even small things to appreciate, the mind shifts attention from what is lacking to what is present, activating neural circuits associated with reward and satisfaction. This simple acknowledgement strengthens emotional resilience, diminishes reactivity, and cultivates a baseline of equanimity that carries into decisions and interactions throughout the day. The process is cumulative. Regular recognition of what is good, what is functional, and what is meaningful strengthens the capacity for reflection, reduces the pull of minor irritations, and allows deliberate action to emerge naturally. The mind becomes calibrated to notice opportunity rather than being hijacked by stress or distraction. Expressive writing also allows the externalization of worries or intrusive thoughts, freeing working memory from clutter and increasing cognitive bandwidth. What once occupied mental energy in loops of anxiety is translated into structured form. By recording fears, doubts, or anticipations, the mind can process them with clarity, see patterns, and determine appropriate responses rather than being dominated by unexamined reactions. The act of putting thought into words separates observation from judgment, allowing for a kind of cognitive space where reasoning can prevail. This, in turn, fosters emotional regulation and prepares the mind for challenges without succumbing to reactivity. Handwriting as a deliberate practice, combined with attention to gratitude, priority, and expressive release, creates a quiet but profound foundation for the day. The early morning, when the mind is still fluid and receptive, becomes a laboratory for self-mastery. Each session reinforces neural pathways of attention, patience, and self-command. The act is simple, yet its effects compound across days and weeks, establishing habits that underpin clarity, resilience, and intentional action. This ritual exemplifies the Stoic principle that control over the mind is the greatest freedom, and that preparation of the inner self precedes mastery of external circumstances. The hand, guided by attention, shapes thought, and in shaping thought, it shapes life. By the time the session concludes, the mind has been oriented, priorities clarified, and attention sharpened. The simple act of putting pen to paper achieves a balance of reflection and preparation, merging cognition with intention and emotion with insight. It is a practice that is at once practical and philosophical, grounded in both neuroscience and Stoic wisdom. The daily habit of deliberate writing fosters resilience, presence, and purpose, establishing a framework within which the day and life can be navigated with calm clarity and reasoned action. Through this consistent alignment of thought and expression, the mind is strengthened and prepared to engage the world with intentionality and discernment. For the first hour after waking, the world's demands are not your concern. The phone's notifications, the buzz of messages, the endless stream of curated updates all wait. Each alert, subtle as it may seem, has the potential to fracture attention, to redirect energy from what matters to what is merely urgent for someone else. The mind, freshly open and highly malleable, is a field in which early choices take root. By preserving this hour, by creating a sanctuary of awareness before the barrage begins, you allow thought to unfold with clarity and intention. The act of resisting distraction is not restriction, it is cultivation. Just as a gardener tends the soil before planting, the mind requires space, quiet, and focus before it can produce deliberate and meaningful action. The impulse to reach for the phone is strong because it is immediate, familiar, and filled with small doses of novelty. Dopamine spikes briefly with each notification, each image, each message, creating the illusion of reward and engagement. Yet the reward is illusory, the engagement shallow. What it truly accomplishes is the erosion of mental bandwidth, a subtle but cumulative weakening of the capacity for sustained attention. In these first moments, when thought is most plastic, surrendering to external demands is a quiet abdication of agency. By refusing to hand over this time, the mind remains anchored, free to set the emotional and cognitive tone for the day rather than reacting to the stimuli imposed by others. Even a short delay, practiced consistently, compounds into a discipline that reshapes attention, intention, and presence over the weeks and months. Caffeine, when delayed until after this window, amplifies the benefits rather than undermining them. Its stimulating effect coincides with the body's natural readiness, reinforcing alertness rather than creating abrupt spikes and crashes. The nervous system, already engaged and aligned through deliberate awakening, movement, and reflection, receives the chemical support of caffeine without disruption. Energy flows consistently rather than chaotically. The body and mind, synchronized in this way, enter the day with a resilience that sustains attention, focus, and composure. Even small adjustments in timing create outsized effects on performance, mood, and clarity. The timing of intake is a reminder that choice and awareness govern experience more than the substances or inputs themselves. The practice of withholding external input in the morning also reinforces autonomy. Each deliberate act of attention establishes internal authority, teaching the mind that it can resist impulse, delay gratification, and prioritize intentional action. These lessons, repeated daily, reinforce the Stoic principle that mastery of the self is the foundation of freedom. By refusing to allow external noise to dictate emotional or cognitive states, The mind internalizes a sense of sovereignty that extends beyond the morning. Choices are exercised before the world imposes, and in this early assertion, the trajectory of the day, and perhaps life itself, is subtly shaped by reason and reflection rather than reaction. There is also a psychological elegance in this restraint. The mind, spared from the habitual interruptions of notifications, develops a capacity for sustained engagement. Concentration, once fragmented by habit, becomes an attainable state. Ideas, reflections, and intentions can emerge fully formed rather than interrupted mid-process. Emotional states stabilize as the mind is no longer pulled by microdopamine spikes into transient distraction. By allowing the first hour to unfold free from external imposition, one creates a cognitive architecture in which deliberate action, rather than impulsive reaction, becomes the default. The discipline of attentional protection cultivates calm, clarity, and resilience, even before the day has demanded anything of the individual. The subtleties of this practice extend beyond the purely cognitive. Physical rhythms synchronize with mental states. Posture becomes aligned, breath deepens, and heart rate stabilizes. The body, unhurried by reactive movement toward digital input, engages naturally in preparation for the day. Circulatory and neural processes operate without disruption, supporting the emergence of focus, creativity, and deliberate thought. The mind and body, once misaligned by fragmented attention, are now coordinated, allowing the day's challenges to be approached with composure rather than scattered effort. Each conscious moment of focus in this sacred period reinforces the harmony of physiological and psychological readiness. The freedom discovered in this period is the essence of Stoic philosophy. External events are beyond control, yet the mind retains dominion over perception, attention, and choice. By cultivating an environment free from distraction, one exercises mastery over the earliest and most plastic moments of the day. The discipline of attention, practiced for even a single hour, establishes a template for intentionality, composure, and presence that reverberates across hours and interactions. In preserving the mind from the subtle hijacking of notifications and interruptions, one cultivates clarity, resilience, and a quiet authority that informs every subsequent act. This simple but powerful practice reminds us that time is not inherently neutral. It is shaped by attention, intention, and the order in which inputs are received. By dedicating the first hour to reflection, movement, and internal calibration, rather than reactive engagement, one establishes a foundation for mental sovereignty. The day, once fragmented and driven by external demands, becomes guided by deliberate choice, reason, and awareness. In this practice, the mind is both shielded and trained, and each day begins as an exercise in freedom, discipline, and conscious living. As Aristotle observed, we are what we repeatedly do. Excellence, then, is not an act, but a habit. In the context of mourning, the habit of delayed engagement, of protecting focus and attention before the world intervenes, becomes the quiet engine of excellence. The first hour is claimed not by distraction or impulse, but by conscious action, establishing a tone of clarity, presence, and deliberate intention that endures far beyond the waking moments themselves. The act of visualization begins with careful attention to the unfolding of events. The mind traces the steps that must be taken, the interactions that will occur, and the tasks that demand focus. By constructing these sequences internally, the brain creates neural pathways that mirror the real activity, priming both cognition and emotion for what is to come. Anticipatory practice allows the mind to operate more efficiently when faced with actual decisions, because a preliminary rehearsal has already aligned thought, emotion, and intention. The Stoics recognized this as a tool for equanimity. Mental preparation mitigates the reactive pull of external circumstance, allowing reason to prevail over impulse. Obstacles become manageable, not through avoidance, but through deliberate forethought and mental rehearsal. shaping the mind to respond with clarity and calm rather than panic or distraction. The psychological mechanisms at work are subtle but profound. Visualization stimulates prefrontal networks associated with planning and decision-making, essentially priming the mind for action before the body has even begun to move in the day's tasks. Emotional responses, often reactive and exaggerated in the absence of preparation, are tempered by anticipatory rehearsal. When the brain has already seen a potential challenge and mentally practiced a reasoned response, it is less likely to default to fear, frustration, or anxiety in the moment. Neural pathways are reinforced through repetition of intention, and the habitual engagement of reflective foresight strengthens executive function. The day, previously experienced as unpredictable or overwhelming, now unfolds against a scaffold of conscious preparation. Visualization also serves as a moral and ethical compass. The Stoics emphasized the importance of intention in guiding action. By imagining the day with deliberate attention, the mind can prioritize actions that reflect values over those driven by habit, desire, or external pressure. In this quiet rehearsal, ethical clarity is practiced, and the individual becomes attuned to choices that reinforce integrity, patience, and deliberate care. The anticipatory structure created by visualization ensures that both thought and action align with reasoned purpose, cultivating virtue in a practical and immediately applicable manner. It is a form of active preparation for the moral and emotional challenges of life, embedded in the early moments of conscious engagement. By the conclusion of this reflection and visualization, the day has already been partially navigated in thought, preemptively rehearsed and structured. Mental clarity, emotional stability, and practical readiness are established before the first external demand appears. The mind emerges with a sense of sovereignty, equipped to meet tasks with calm purpose rather than reactive impulse. This early investment in conscious preparation is subtle yet profound, shaping attention, intention, and action in a way that influences the day's trajectory far more than isolated effort later on. Choice, presence, and agency become habitual patterns through the repeated engagement of reflection and visualization, cultivating the mental environment necessary for consistent self-mastery. Integration transforms the morning from a series of isolated actions into a coherent, living practice that shapes both mind and day. Conscious awakening, the subtle attunement to light, the deliberate movement, the brief confrontation with discomfort, the reflective writing, the preservation of focus, and the mindful visualization, all converge into a rhythm that is more than the sum of its parts. Each practice primes the next, creating layers of readiness, attention, and presence that reinforce one another. The mind, no longer scattered or passive, becomes responsive, resilient, and intentional. This compounded effect is not visible to anyone else, but it is profoundly experienced by the one who engages it. The early morning is transformed into a rehearsal of life itself, a microcosm where clarity, composure, and purpose are chosen before the world imposes its demands. Each habit feeds into the next with subtle reciprocity. Movement primes attention, and attention deepens reflection. Reflection strengthens visualization, and visualization reinforces the discipline to resist distraction. Light calibrates the body's rhythms, enhancing the nervous system's readiness to respond rather than react. Controlled discomfort trains resilience, tempering emotional and cognitive reactivity. Writing externalizes thought, freeing cognitive bandwidth for intentional action. Delaying digital engagement preserves the sanctity of focus, allowing the mind to organize its priorities. When these elements are engaged consecutively, they create a rhythm in which presence becomes habitual, and the day's trajectory is set not by circumstance, but by deliberate intention. The morning, though brief, establishes a template for the entire day, echoing into the hours, decisions, and interactions that follow. The mind itself becomes a beneficiary of this integration. Neurochemical, neurological and cognitive processes align, producing a state of readiness that supports both efficiency and composure. Cortisol, naturally released in response to light and movement, provides alertness without the volatility of stress. Dopamine and serotonin circulate in patterns that enhance mood and motivation. Neural pathways are reinforced through the repetition of deliberate action, embedding both habit and agency. Executive function is optimized, allowing the prefrontal cortex to guide thought and behavior with clarity. The brain, primed by intentional practice, responds with composure, reasoning, and discernment rather than distraction or impulsivity. Even minor disturbances, which might have previously triggered irritation or reactivity, are absorbed into a broader framework of attentional stability and emotional regulation. Emotionally, the integration of these practices instills a sense of sovereignty over oneself. By structuring the early moments, one establishes ownership of the internal state, creating a buffer against the unpredictable demands of the external world. The first hour becomes a refuge, a place in which the mind is undistracted, purposeful, and attuned to reason. Emotional energy, once susceptible to the pull of habit or novelty, is redirected toward conscious intention. The day, entering from this foundation, is approached with steadiness, confidence, and clarity. This emotional equilibrium is neither fragile nor artificial. It emerges from repeated alignment of body, mind, and attention, producing a baseline of resilience that endures even as circumstances fluctuate. The philosophical significance of this compounded approach is profound. The Stoics recognized that freedom is achieved not through circumstance, but through mastery of self. By integrating conscious awakening, reflection, movement, and controlled challenges, one exercises sovereignty over thought, emotion, and action. External events remain indifferent, yet internal governance is cultivated. The morning becomes a rehearsal in autonomy, a disciplined orchestration in which the mind is directed, present, and deliberate. The practices themselves are not ends but instruments, tools for cultivating inner authority and mental clarity. By engaging fully in this window, the individual reinforces the Stoic principle that mastery of self is the foundation of freedom and virtue. Even the smallest details of this integration have meaningful consequences. Standing in sunlight while engaging in reflective thought reinforces circadian alignment and attentional readiness. The rhythm of movement complements cognitive priming, enhancing focus and energy. The deliberate choice to experience brief discomfort trains resilience in the face of adversity. Handwriting structures thought, consolidating mental clarity. Preservation of focus against digital intrusion ensures that priorities rather than distractions guide the mind. Visualization maps intention onto action. Each component strengthens the others, and through repetition, the compounded effect becomes an ingrained pattern, a mental architecture that supports clarity, composure, and reason throughout the day. The practical implications extend beyond the morning itself. By creating a mind that is disciplined, attentive, and responsive at the start of the day, the individual sets a tone that informs every interaction, decision, and challenge that follows. The ability to respond rather than react, to act from principle rather than habit, is reinforced continually. Moments that might otherwise create frustration or distraction are absorbed into a broader structure of intentionality and composure. The compounded practices become internal scaffolding, supporting executive function, emotional regulation, and strategic focus. The morning, brief as it is, becomes a locus of agency, where freedom is exercised and resilience is cultivated before the external world makes its demands. Reflection on this integrated routine reveals its elegance. The morning is no longer a haphazard sequence of tasks, but a ritual of preparation, alignment, and conscious action. Each act, whether physical, cognitive, or reflective, feeds the next, producing momentum, clarity, and readiness. The individual emerges from this period equipped not only to complete tasks, but to engage with the world with intentionality and awareness. Choices made in these early hours resonate throughout the day, producing compounded effects that extend into productivity, emotional stability, and the capacity for deliberate action. The integration of these practices exemplifies a living philosophy in which virtue, attention, and purpose are enacted daily. This compounded morning practice culminates in a profound assertion of freedom. Each decision to act with intention, to engage in disciplined thought, to honor the body and mind, represents sovereignty over oneself. The window is brief, yet its effect is enduring. By consistently choosing presence over distraction, preparation over reaction, the day, and ultimately life, can be guided with clarity and purpose. Internal authority is established before external events can interfere. The mind, having rehearsed composure, clarity, and intention, approaches challenges with resilience and focus. The early morning becomes a microcosm of agency, a ritual in which the individual practices the Stoic ideal of self-governance in the moments that matter most. Marcus Aurelius observed, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." In the morning, each choice, each deliberate act, and each disciplined pause transforms potential obstacles, discomfort, distraction, indecision, into instruments of clarity, resilience, and purposeful engagement. The compounded effect of integrated practice is the cultivation of a mind that is directed, attentive, and sovereign, capable of navigating the day with presence, reason, and deliberate action. Freedom is exercised, mastery is practiced, and the morning is claimed, not surrendered. And now, as the morning settles and the day unfolds, remember this: each small act, each deliberate choice is a quiet declaration that your mind, your attention, and your life are yours to govern. The habits you've cultivated in these first moments ripple outward, shaping not just hours, but the very quality of who you become. Presence, clarity, and purpose are not abstract ideals. They are forged in repeated action, in conscious intention, and in the courage to act before the world demands it. If the lessons here resonated, take the next step. Watch the video on the screen to explore practical strategies for deepening your focus and mastering the subtle art of self-discipline. Every insight builds upon the last, and every practice is another opportunity to shape the mind, cultivate resilience, and live intentionally. Thank you for being a part of Stoic Journal, for choosing presence over distraction, action over habit, and for committing to the continuous journey of self-mastery. Your attention, your reflection, and your growth are what make this community meaningful